Have you ever wondered how a tiny spark can ignite a catastrophe that reshapes an entire city? In 1666, London was about to learn this lesson in the most devastating way possible. What started as a small fire in a humble bakery would soon become one of the most infamous disasters in history, forever changing the face of London. This is the story of the Great Fire. To truly understand the scale of this disaster, we need to travel back in time to the 17th century. Imagine London not as the sprawling modern metropolis we know today, but as a cramped, medieval city. The streets were narrow, winding, and often filthy. The buildings were a tinderbox waiting for a flame. Most houses were constructed primarily from wood and plaster, with thatched roofs being common in the poorer districts. These structures were built incredibly close together, often with upper floors jutting out over the street, almost touching the buildings opposite. This dense, wooden labyrinth was home to hundreds of thousands of people, living cheek by jowl. Sanitation was poor, and the city was still recovering from the Great Plague that had ravaged it just a year before. London in 1666 was a city of immense character and history, but it was also a city dangerously vulnerable to fire. All it needed was a single, careless moment. That moment arrived in the early hours of Sunday, September 2nd, 1666. The spark that would ignite the inferno came from a small bakery on Pudding Lane, owned by a man named Thomas Fariner, the king's baker. The night before, Fariner had failed to properly extinguish the embers in his oven. Sometime after midnight, those glowing embers sparked, igniting nearby firewood. The Fariner family was asleep upstairs and woke to a house full of smoke. They managed to escape by climbing out of an upstairs window and onto the roof of the neighboring house. But tragically, their maid was too frightened to follow and became the fire's first victim. Initially, the fire seemed like just another of the many small blazes that were common in the city, but this one was different. This one would not be as easily contained. The summer of 1666 had been long, hot, and dry, leaving the wooden buildings of London. As the fire took hold of the bakery, a strong easterly wind began to blow. This wind acted like a giant bellows, fanning the flames and pushing them westward. The fire began to leap from one wooden rooftop to the next with terrifying speed. Sparks and embers were carried by the wind, starting new fires far ahead of the main blaze. The city's rudimentary firefighting methods were completely overwhelmed. People used leather buckets and primitive hand-pumped water squirts, but they were no match for the roaring inferno. The fire consumed everything in its path: homes, shops, churches, and public buildings. It moved faster than a man could walk, a relentless wall of flame devouring the heart of medieval London. Over the next 4 days, the fire raged, turning the city into a vision of hell on earth. As the fire swept through the city, panic and chaos erupted. The narrow streets became clogged with people desperately trying to save their families and whatever possessions they could carry. The air was thick with black smoke, making it difficult to see or breathe. The roar of the fire was deafening, punctuated by the crash of collapsing buildings. People fled towards the River Thames, hoping to escape by boat, or towards the city gates, seeking refuge in the open fields outside the city walls. The river was packed with barges and boats, overloaded with people and their belongings. Many simply dumped their possessions into the river in a desperate attempt to save them from the flames. Eyewitnesses like the famous diarist Samuel Pepys described scenes of utter pandemonium, with people crying, screaming, and running in every direction. There was no leadership, no organized evacuation. It was every person for themselves as the city burned around them. For 2 days, the fire advanced almost unchecked. The Lord Mayor, Sir Thomas Bloodworth, was indecisive and initially dismissed the fire, famously saying a woman might piss it out. His failure to act swiftly proved catastrophic. By the time the scale of the disaster was clear, it was almost too late. The accepted method for stopping a large fire was to create fire breaks by demolishing buildings in its path, starving the fire of fuel. However, homeowners resisted having their houses pulled down, and the authorities hesitated. Finally, as the fire threatened the Tower of London and the wealthy parts of the city, King Charles II took charge. He and his brother, the Duke of York, personally oversaw the firefighting efforts. They ordered sailors from the Royal Navy to use gunpowder to blow up entire rows of houses, creating massive fire breaks. This controversial but necessary tactic, combined with the wind finally dying down on the 4th day, began to turn the tide. The explosions created wide gaps that the fire could not cross, and slowly, painstakingly, the inferno was brought under control. When the smoke finally cleared, the scale of the destruction was staggering. The Great Fire of London had been extinguished, but it had left a wasteland in its wake. Over 4/5 of the walled city had been destroyed. More than 13,000 houses, 87 parish churches, St. Paul's Cathedral, and most of the city's public buildings were now just smoking ruins. Astonishingly, the official death toll was very low, with only a handful of deaths recorded. However, it's likely that many more perished, their remains incinerated and lost in the chaos. Hundreds of thousands of people were left homeless, camping in makeshift shelters in the fields surrounding the city. But out of these ashes, a new London would rise. The rebuilding was a monumental task. The disaster prompted a complete rethink of urban design. New building regulations were introduced, mandating the use of brick and stone instead of wood. Streets were made wider and straighter to prevent fire from spreading, so as Sir Christopher Wren, the brilliant architect, was tasked with redesigning the city and its churches, including the magnificent new St. Paul's Cathedral that stands today. The fire, for all its horror, paved the way for a more modern, safer, and more resilient London. The Great Fire of London was a defining moment in the city's history. It was a tragedy of immense proportions that destroyed the medieval heart of the city, but it also catalyzed its rebirth into a modern capital. The lessons learned from the ashes of 1666 led to innovations in fire safety, building codes, and urban planning that influenced cities all over the world. It's a powerful reminder of how disaster can lead to renewal and progress, but it also leaves us with a lingering question. With all our advanced technology and knowledge, could a disaster of this magnitude happen in one of our modern cities today? What do you think? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this journey back in time, don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories from history.